recent months teaching a lot about the family lines and about ancestry, and what we inherit with the body. And often the first place we go with that is to the mother line, to the mother aspect and the mother's mother. Often those are the first disturbances that come forward, which makes total sense because that's also our experience in the womb. The different patterns of stress and cortisol in the mother's blood according to sound stimulation outside, and patterns of relaxation which are already in a way getting encoded into our biology. Yeah. But wherever we touch the mother, we touch the father at the same time. They are actually inseparable. In Glastonbury we talk a lot about the polarities of male and female, but in a way this is what plays out on the external, but on the internal there you cannot have male without female or female without male. They utterly coexist. And of course, whenever we talk about gender, there's so many programs already in play about what male is and what female is. It's so deeply conditioned, and it's conditioned in a way which is actually into the reflexes almost. It's so deeply conditioned and collective that it would almost be impossible to say what's nature and what's nurture, meaning what we're born with and what we get from that very first moment when we are identified as either a boy or a girl. You know, the baby is utterly and totally innocent and whole until the ultrasound. Or if there's no ultrasound till the moment the sex is identified, and immediately comes a ton of baggage. Real-time baggage of expectations of the parents of how they identify male and female, and also historic. If it's a girl, then. If it's a boy, then it's my heir. It's the lineage. Or this is also in our blood. The boy will have the right to exist and the female shall support him. Or the girl needs to be compensated because she's a girl, so that she won't be a girl too much. Because girls suffer. So in later days we'll go more into the female aspect. We'll be at the white well, and this happens by itself. The mother is in a way always here, our mothers, our intimate mothers. We think she's here, and we're taking care of her, but no matter when we get her in front of her, she's behind our back at the same time. Funnily enough, behind her is the father, and behind him is the mother again, and it goes in layers, like concentric circles. So in the whole debate between God and Goddess, you know, you can't say who started it, really. I mean, probably it's the Goddess, but you find God and there's a Goddess behind. And you find the Goddess behind, and there's a support behind of a godly energy. It really moves like this. So the contraction around gender is quite destructive in a way, that this is male and this is female, because it's an expanding circle, series of circles, the realm of possibility. So, to speak through stereotypes a little bit, one of the chief stereotypes is about male sexuality. Before we get to his role in the world and his status and his position, there is this stereotype that men basically just want to get it in and spritz and leave. And there's this kind of active, almost active immunity, like they don't suffer. The female is violated in a way, and I mean aspects as well. It's also energetic. And the man, this is the stereotype, and the man is the strong one who takes no risk. And this is incredibly untrue when you look to the male aspect. The male aspect is in many, many, many ways extremely vulnerable. And perhaps precisely because of that vulnerability, there is this compensation with the big bravado in this face, but actually it's all hanging out there. Sorry, boys, but you know what I mean? And so another classical stereotype is that women share their emotions and their feelings and all of this, and men don't share. And this is a form which has grown up through conditioning. But actually there's a good reason why there is this reluctance to share, because when a man lets down the mask, it can be incredibly vulnerable all at once, almost too much to contain. So there's a different way of moving into intimacy. That means a lot of our fathers might seem like very cold, distant, hard to get through to, but there's a whole other well underneath that of feeling, and which, driven by a basic need to protect and keep peace, is kept back. This basic training to take care and to support, and so to not to show the emotions because it will upset things more, and to keep things calm. This is a protective urge. In its origin, it's a way to support. So for many of us, especially since Freud, the father is in the blind spot. And I don't mean as an authority. As an authority, he's right there, you know, in a way representing the world and the law. And so in this, Freud was quite right. But in terms of intimacy and the subtlety of who he is, what he was, how he moved, how he felt, how he experienced, how it would be to be our own father, inside out. It's often very, very closed down. And yet we have our fathers inside of us, all of us. Our father is alive in us. And in many ways, he is the bridge and the support and the resource which is here between us and the outside world. The world of politics, the world of coping, the world of finances, what people call the real world. If we're blocked with our father, we often are blocked in a resource of being here and being able to manage money, being able to manage our lives, being able to structure, being able to let go of emotions and be calm. Often a block will be there, because this resource of the father is complicated, which of course is like that for all of us. We're all in the same conditioning. So what we like to do during this day is begin to open the ancestry, the inheritance, a little bit through the father doorway. And I just want to repeat a little bit about the science, because some of you know it and some of you don't, but it's always good to, especially because it's the male line, to know that this isn't just rubbish. So, and I'm sorry if I bore you from London, but I think it's important because it gives an authentication to what we're saying. So in the last 4 years, there's been research into epigenetics, which is you have your DNA, which you inherit in tiny, tiny, tiny within inside every cell of the body. And above the DNA, you have epigenetics, which means over the genes. It's controlling the genes. And of course, this is how it is with nature. The only way we can control nature is to repress it. We can't really make it go away. We can just disactivate it for a while. So there is this chemical process called methylation, which represses certain genes. And genes by themselves, in naturalness, they're qualities. They're there for quality expression through multiple forms. But the layer above will kind of close down a gene if it sees a survival threat. So they took some mice in 2014, was it? And with these mice, they actually traced it through the father line, the effects of trauma. And they found that if they consistently give an electric shock to these mice when they smell cherry blossom, then they can train them to go into total stress response every time there's a smell of cherry blossom. But then they found it's also true, and they took the father mice. So baby mice, not growing up with the fathers, but from the sperm of those fathers, were showing the same responses with the smell of cherry blossom, even without electric shock, and the grandchildren as well. So what they saw was that even through the male line, simply on the epigenetic layer, no womb experience here, no nurturing experience, trauma was getting passed on from one generation to the next. So any trauma in the father's family is resonating somewhere in survival responses within our system. You know, the DNA is in every single cell of the body, and if the DNA starts saying cortisol, stress, run, survive, run for China, freeze, then we're doing it before our minds or before the education system even got a look in. So this, and there's been a lot of other research with Holocaust survivors and people from what they call now post-traumatic slave syndrome with African Americans. And so those are the big traumas, but actually it's down to even very small contractions. You know, it's got a refinement to it. So if our father, for example, if in our family line, for example, through the father, there's been a lot of issues around shame. So shame causes stress. So a shameful situation, and it can be quite specific, will set off those survival responses. And of course, when we are in a survival response, the mind contracts. It actually rigidifies the neural networks. We lose our freedom. The body is either frozen or restless, and we find it much more difficult to be at peace, sometimes. So after a while, you can be at peace with all of that happening at the same time. But for a while, this can be a game opener in realizing this didn't start with me. Something is happening here through the biological system. It's okay. We can take that stress and say, I'm here for you. It's really okay. I know this isn't personal. And just let it do its thing and move through like fear, because stress moves very fast if you just let it move. We have a part in making stress more stressful by identifying with it and saying, this is because of me. This is my problem. This is my personal story. I'm not okay. So we put layer after layer of stress and guilt and separation on top and cover up on top of what was originally maybe a stress response which we inherited because our father was in a war. Am I going too fast? No, good. So when a baby is born, it's very much born in first of all, it's in unity with its mother, and then it's born into a kind of interplay of, in the best case scenario, a soft separation from the mother and reunion with the mother, and a soft separation and a reunion. It's a bit like meditation, you know, this pendulation movement. Being put to sleep and then coming back to the mother and being nurtured, and separation, togetherness, and then in a best case scenario, the father is very much part of that. So it's the mother and the father and back to bed, and there is a sharing. But often, because of the mother's history, there is a distance as well. And the male aspect can feel when there's a baby in unity with the mother that they're totally left alone. The whole abandonment of their own babyhood can come forward. It's like they had this partner and this soulmate and this intimacy, and then suddenly it's there with the baby, and the husband is extra, spare cricket a wedding, you know, extra. And then they go and get a dog. You know, I do have a baby, but it's extremely lonely. And this with our fathers over time can build up to feeling like a stranger in their own home. They come back and it's from work to earn money, to keep everything safe, out of care, and the wife's already, because of her history, in a like, I've been with the children all day and you're late, and not knowing what is going on with the secretary and all of this, and big spaces can appear, which for the child is quite like, ooh! It's tearing him or her a little bit up inside. Because for the child, they are 100% daddy and 100% mummy, aren't they? And 100% themselves. To start with. For a second thing, if there is this classic contractions, which is endemic among us, our culture, our civilization, of guilt and shame, then even though the parents don't tell anything to the children about what's going on, the children are reverberating with that energy of guilt and shame. They get it anyway. Children get it. We don't need to tell them anything because they're naked energetically. They vibrate with it. So we cannot make it our children's fault that we're carrying guilt by not telling them that we're carrying guilt, but the children feel between themselves and their parents this energy of guilt. They feel it, right? It's got a vibration. And of course we can't bring up our children in a perfect world, and that's part of their learning to see the freedom. All we can do is keep the connection, stay connected anyway, and hold these energies together in a way. So when we look into the ancestry, and I'm not going to go too long into it because I could talk for days on this, you know. For me, it's a kind of a way of reclaiming my father as well, who I hardly knew, and I got to know through my own body, in a way. I suddenly found all of these qualities which were clearly his, even though I hardly knew him when I was little. So we tend to focus on the trauma when we look backwards into the generations, and this is maybe the most important point with the father line. The trauma is just a tiny piece. The repression of the DNA is a healable, totally fixable, resonant aspect of our biology. The main line is a line of peace and love, and especially care, incredible care. So this care, as expressed through our fathers or our grandfathers, can be incredibly fucked up and controlling and authoritative, but its seed is care. Its seed is love for the children. It's incredible holding of this very, very strong love. And in a way, at certain stages, especially when we do healing work, that care and that love begins to reverberate, and the trauma needs to be healed, and it needs to be healed through us. And maybe what's releasing is the horror of our grandparent who was taken to a prison camp, who felt he would never come home. That could be what's releasing, but the real legacy here is the care, which opens out once that epigenetic layer is released and brought to peace. You know, again, we are 99% non-dual quality. The rest is just this facade of personhood which is changing, and the biology is part of the personhood. We have an infinity of life inside us, an infinity of peace. There is not one ancestor, even if they were a perpetrator, even if they were a bad guy, whatever that is, there is not one ancestor that would wish us as their descendants bad. They want it to be good for us. So in the meditations we do today, we're going to go into history, into the Abbey later on, which is really a place of the most horrible destruction. I mean, the Abbey is exquisitely beautiful, and Harriet was saying about the purity in the whole atmosphere there. But what destroyed the Abbey was really pure hatred. It was destruction for destruction's sake, and it wasn't even destruction because it's still there. It was humiliation. It was shaming. It was let the ruins of it stand as a warning to others. It's got that extra Nazi twist to it, you know, like Arbeit macht frei. You know, it's almost cynical. So that plays a part. Destruction plays a part in liberation as well, because whenever there's a lot of destruction, that which cannot be destroyed becomes much more bright. There are just some things you can't destroy. Khalil Gibran said, you can crush the flower, but its scent will fill the room. You know, yeah. So we are in the Church of England retreat house with a vicar. Opposite us is the Catholic cathedral destroyed by Henry VIII. And with a lot of episodes moving through of really nastiness, jealousy, this whole toxic, just hating for hating's sake through the archaeology here, of people finding the magic and then being oppressed and put out, like the monks I told somebody about. it's a whole other story. And being able to be at peace in walking through these different environments is to stay as peace. And to allow all of these movements is very, very, very healing. It's transformative over the long term and at the depth. To be able to stay as peace, whatever's moving through us or moving around us or is visible around us, is deeply healing, also of the past. Yeah. When we touch our ancestors inside ourselves and we reconnect with the peace inside of them, they are also released. It's working in all directions, and it's always in the now. It's in the now because we're really talking about resonance. You know, when the DNA is already tiny, 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 and then you get to the epigenetics, we are talking about something which the average ultrasound machine could blast away if it could be precise enough. You know, with ultrasound, they can now explode tumors inside the brain. They can heal tumors with ultrasound. It's not FDA approved yet, but they have that technology. So sound, vibration, resonance. Did you know that? I'll give you the company details. So sound and vibration and resonance, which is the resonance of our feelings, the resonance of the inner scream, which needs to scream to release for the peace and the silence to come back. The resonance of love, the resonance of peace, it's having an effect, a healing effect throughout the whole body. And we all, you know, in the 1980s it was really still totally esoteric and hippie to talk about the vibe in a room. You know, these days all the executives are saying...
There was a YouTube film by Chinese healers chanting, and then the tumor goes away in a couple of hours.
Yeah.
Now I remember.
Yeah. So yeah, what I was talking about was actually an ultrasound machine which they're using to explode fibroids inside the womb, and they can use it for brain tumors which are inoperable just through sound. They dissolve the tumor, and for relief in cancer patients, terminal cancer patients, so that they suffer much less pain. They reduce the tumors just through ultrasound. There's no knives. It's like the future operating room. Like surgery with a knife is going to look like they did that. Yeah. So sound is really, really important, and that's partly what we're talking about during these days, is the vibrations of peace, the melodies of peace. And sound, of course, is already the way to access these subtle vibrations is to listen to the quality of the silence. Sometimes the silence inside ourselves, and sometimes we find we just disappear and it's just the silence, because the silence inside ourselves is actually one with the silence outside of ourselves. And silence can be very noisy, and sometimes it can be quite discordant. You know, silence is just not silence, is it? It's a whole happening, and it can be totally empty as well, which is such a freedom inside out. So all the way to the science, we really believe that the vibration of feelings and emotions and of peace and of love and of care is quite important all the way to the physical level. And in the end, Bart's teacher Bob said the highest we can come to in all of our inner growth is a position of naturalness. And that's really something, naturalness. To be totally yourself, natural at any moment. We're not there yet, but we know, we see the evolution.